it can be surprising which comic book characters leave an impact and launch into the mainstream. One such creation is The Mask, who's most well known for being the subject of a hit movie to the point many may not realize it originated in a comic. The initial conception was created by Michael Richardson, the founder of Dark Horse Comics, who saw it as a combination of the DC characters Creeper and the Joker. Mark Badger would take a crack at it, but it turned out very different from what Richardson intended. This version did not last long, and Richardson then gave the idea to writer John Arcudi and artist Doug Mahnke. A storyline was conceived of a timid man named Stanley Ipkiss, who purchases the mask in the store as a gift for his girlfriend Kathy. When he tries it on, his face turns green, he gains magical abilities, and he goes on a violent rampage around town on those who he feels wronged him. He earns the nickname Big Head, and his personality when not wearing the mask also changes. Eventually Kathy puts it on and shoots and kills Stanley. She later takes it to a police lieutenant named Kellaway, and he too puts it on and goes on his own violent series of murders in the city. That's just the first collection. From then on, the mask hops from owner to owner with all kinds of carnage following in its wake, although Kathy and Kellaway would make return appearances. By the way, when I say the comic was violent, I mean it was really violent, with all kinds of gory and gruesome scenes, and the mask leaving a lot of dead bodies in its wake. Stanley Ipkiss was more akin to Michael Douglas's character in Falling Down, rather than the likable schlub who would become known as in later incarnations. He was a powder keg waiting to burst, and the mask allowed him the opportunity to explode in truly horrific ways. Richardson's idea for the mask, which Arcudi and Mahnke will later expand on, was that it amplified the wearer's worst tendencies and gave them the ability to do the horrible things they wished to do but wouldn't act upon. The comic book would eventually catch the attention of New Line Cinema, who saw it as a new horror franchise in the vein of the popular Nightmare on Elm Street series. Chuck Russell was even hired to direct based on his work on the third Elm Street movie. However, he was keen on directing something lighter instead and thought the concept would lend itself better to a zany comedy. The comics already had a bit of a cartoon sensibility, and Russell would lean into that more while lessening the blood and body count. Several actors were considered for the lead role, including Nicolas Cage, Matthew Broderick, Rick Moranis, Steve Martin, and Robin Williams. That last choice would have certainly resulted in an interesting movie. However, Russell's number one choice was Jim Carrey, based primarily on his performances on the sketch show In Living Color. This was even before Ace Ventura: Pet Detective was released, so it was not yet known if he had drawing power. The script went through the usual pre-production changes, with Russell coming up with the idea that Loki, the Norse god of mischief, was trapped inside the masks, and that's what gave the wearer their powers and personality change. Stanley was also made a more sympathetic character than in the comics, and given a cute dog named Milo. While some scenes have the mask doing things like getting revenge on those who wronged Stanley and stealing money from the bank he works at, he was not nearly as violent as his comic counterpart. Kathy evolved into a different love interest, the nightclub singer Tina Carlisle, and a new villain was created, a gangster named Dorian who also wears the mask in the third act. Industrial Light and Magic was then hired to provide the visual effects. Carrey turned out to be a perfect choice to play the role, nailing the two personalities of Stanley Ipkiss. He captured the pathetic nature of the character in the early scenes, but with an element of sympathy there, as everything goes wrong for him and he has trouble standing up for himself. When he puts on the mask, Carrey's rubbery-faced expressions are put to great use, and he successfully shows the complete transformation into this wacky cartoon man, whether being a wild Bugs Bunny-type troublemaker or performing a musical number. And Greg Cannom also deserves credit for his makeup, which brought to light the green-headed appearance from the comics while also giving Carrey the freedom to contort his face in several ways. And then for the things Carrey obviously cannot do himself, like his head transforming to a wolf or his eyes popping out of his face, ILM would handle those with the computer-generated effects available at the time. Even outside of Carrey, The Mask is a fun movie, with Russell's direction having a zippy energy to it, and the swing music-filled soundtrack becoming another major component. Cameron Diaz also deserves praise for her film debut as Tina. It's quite a multi-layered character, as it's sort of hinted at, but not outright stated, that maybe she already knows Stanley is the Mask before it's revealed to her. I also like that she's a lot more charmed by Stanley as himself than when he's in the mask persona. Milo steals a few scenes, including when he puts on the mask, and Peter Reigard is very funny as Kellaway. When the mask was released, audiences really took to its antics, and in particular Jim Carrey's performance. While Ace Ventura: Pet Detective made him a bigger name, The Mask is what ultimately catapulted him to superstardom. It was one of those summer movies that had a decent opening and then chugged along for the rest of the season, eventually making an impressive $351 million worldwide and winding up as the fourth highest grossing film of 1994. Some of the Mask catchphrases in the movie, like "smokin'" and "somebody stop me," even entered the public lexicon. It was quite a phenomenon and gave New Line the new potential franchise they were looking for when they first bought the rights. The first thing out the gate was an animated series. The movie was already a lot less violent than the comics, so making a Saturday morning cartoon led to the character being sanitized even more, although that anarchic spirit was still present. He was depicted more as a superhero, with Stanley wearing the mask to help save Ed City from various villains. Rob Paulsen provided the voice of Stanley in the mask and did a pretty good job of filling in for Jim Carrey, while also putting his own spin on the character. While it retained elements from the movie, it's not exactly a direct continuation. After all, Stanley happily threw the mask in the river in the final scene, but he's now back to using it again in the series. He's still friends with Peggy, even though she betrayed him in the movie, and Tina is strangely absent. I don't even recall her getting mentioned in the show. Being an animated series, it definitely leaned into the cartoony nature of the character and was more outlandish. The main villain, for example, is just a head on spider legs with the voice of Tim Curry. There was also an episode where the mask interacted with parody versions of the Warners from Animaniacs, which was absolutely done because of Rob Paulsen's involvement. Meanwhile, there was a crossover with the Ace Ventura animated show, resulting in two characters originally played by Jim Carrey interacting. That was certainly something. Being a show, many characters got to wear the mask. Peggy wears it in one episode, a baby gets the opportunity, and Stanley dates a woman who accidentally puts it on. Ben Stein reprised his role as psychiatrist Dr. Newman in one episode, and he ends up wearing it. And Milo gets to try it on again too. As animated shows based on hit movies go, it was entertaining enough, and the writers certainly took advantage of the mask's capabilities with the wacky storylines they came up with. And of the three shows based on Jim Carrey movies, this one lasted the longest at 54 episodes. The massive success of the movie also meant New Line was keen on producing a sequel. Chuck Russell and Cameron Diaz expressed interest in returning, and Nintendo Power Magazine even launched a contest for someone to be an extra in the second movie. However, when Jim Carrey was asked, he said no. The story goes that the production of Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls put him off doing any more sequels, preferring to instead play new characters from then on. So plans for The Mask 2 were put away. The comics would continue, taking more inspiration from the film and even one that was based on the animated series. There were even crossovers with other characters, like the Wildcats and Lobo. One notable crossover had the Joker get his hands on the mask and wreaking havoc with it. Eventually, a sequel did reach screens, but not quite the one people were hoping for. Released in 2005, that was Son of the Mask, and boy was this a disaster. Directed by Lawrence Guterman and starring Jamie Kennedy, this made so many bizarre decisions that it's one of those bad movies I just find myself fascinated by. Kennedy plays an aspiring animator named Tim Avery, who finds the mask and then gets his wife pregnant, resulting in their newborn son being gifted with the mask's powers and personality. I see what they were trying to do here by paying homage to classic Looney Tunes cartoons, right down to Avery's name being a tribute to Tex Avery. The problem is none of it is funny. Okay, that's actually the least of the movie's problems, which is saying something. Kennedy is completely miscast in the role, and it does not help Tim never becomes all that likable a character. I understand the movie is trying to depict the stresses that can come with getting a baby, but Tim is way too whiny. And then when he puts on the mask, he's just obnoxious, including performing one of the worst musical numbers in film history. The makeup also gives Kennedy no room to change his facial expression. The odd thing is, he only wears it twice in the movie. His dog Otis has it on for way more scenes, which results in Roadrunner-inspired sequences of him and the baby battling each other. Of the people who were demanding a sequel to The Mask, what percentage of them was thinking, I hope it's about a baby? I'm pretty sure it's a very small number. The only person who comes out of this unscathed is Alan Cumming as Loki. He completely understood the tone of the movie and is at least kind of fun, even though he's not given much humorous material to work with. Although the presence of Loki does mess with the continuity of the first film. While that film implied Loki was trapped inside the mask, Son of the Mask reveals that was not the case, and he instead created the mask to cause chaos on Earth. This movie is just relentless as it pummels the audience with all this bizarre imagery filled with uncanny valley effects and nightmare fuel. In the end, Son of the Mask was rejected by both critics and audiences and was a box office flop. Jamie Kennedy did post an interesting series of videos on his YouTube channel talking about why he signed on for the film and the making of it. He also says that the movie was drastically re-edited by New Line, and Lawrence Guterman's original cut is a massive improvement over the theatrical version. And maybe that's possible, but that would be an impressive feat considering what made it on screens. I do think it's a shame Son of the Mask turned out the way it did, because you could do another movie without Stanley Ipkiss, as the comics already proved, and the concept lends itself to multiple characters finding the mask and giving it a whirl. The story they chose for the sequel and the execution just did not work. Meanwhile, the movie was such a failure that it pretty much stopped The Mask in its tracks. Not just on movie and television screens, but even new comics stopped being produced. It would take 9 years for The Mask to pop up again when Dark Horse released a 4-issue comic as part of their Itty Bitty series. A few years later, a Mask comic aimed more at adults was released, titled I Pledge Allegiance to the Mask. In it, a politician finds it and uses it to run for president of the United States. Beyond these, Dark Horse still has not done much with a mask, despite being one of the company's most famous creations. With Jim Carrey softening his stance on sequels in recent years, there have been rumors about him returning for another movie, but those have just been rumors. After the reception of Son the Mask, I don't think New Line is in any hurry to make another sequel, although maybe if Carrey becomes enthusiastic they might change their minds. I've long thought an anthology series with different people coming across the mask could be a creative way to go, but for many, Jim Carrey is the only actor they can imagine wearing it, although there are several fan films being produced out there. Nonetheless, the fact that this violent comic book about this unorthodox character would become such a recognizable icon is certainly impressive. See you next time.